Cool. So welcome. Today we're going to be having Isaac present this. Can you mute yourself for half a second?
Yes.
Maybe I can get the double feedback thing. Whoa. Ooh, fancy. Hold up. I got you. Yeah, because that's. All right, never mind. Yes. Cool. Anyway, cool. Well, welcome everyone. Who here this is your first time out to Downtown Ruby User Group Meetup? Welcome. Great to have you. Maybe. Who knows? Cool. So tonight, like I said, Isaac's going to be presenting to us on Crystal. Who here's heard of Crystal before? Cool. Wonderful. Crystal is like Ruby's.
Compile statically typed Ruby, pretty much.
It's like the C version of Ruby as far as syntax goes. For lack of a more simpler explanation. Now, tonight we actually have the Denver Crystal group is going to be joining our YouTube group live stream as well. So if you guys are seeing this, welcome. Great to have you out here. Let's go around and do introductions first. Before I do that, let's see, announcements from the community. I think we have Open West coming up here pretty soon. It's just a local event that's pretty good. I think they're doing it at Southtown Expo Center this year. So let's see the dates on that actually. Anyone going out to that, Open West? Cool. I'd encourage you to check it out. It's pretty good. July 12th through 15th at Southtown Expo Center. It's really an open source conference. It's not Ruby specific or anything. They do a lot of different tracks. But if any of you are trying to, one of the things I actually like about it a lot is they're starting to do these little workshops and classes for kids and rising developers, which are really pretty cool because not a lot of people are doing that. So if you're interested in that stuff, go check it out because they do a pretty good job with like getting people a little bit of a head start without a whole lot of commitment there. So anyway, openwest.org. They keep tickets pretty cheap, and it's a good local conference to go out to, but they get a lot of traffic from all the Mountain West area. So that's going on. Also, there's a Ruby on Rubens meetup this Friday, meetup as in lunch. So just totally informal, like go out to eat lunch with other Ruby guys and girls and folk. So any other announcements from the community? Cool. If you're not part of the Utah Ruby user groups yet, go to utruby.org, join the mailing list, join the Slack channel. That's how we keep in touch with everyone, and a great place to be. So let's go ahead and do introductions. We'll just go around, say who we are. If you have any, let's see, any cool summer plans that we should be envious of, or ideas for me, because I haven't planned anything and I'm overdue. So, however, just tell the group kind of how long you've been doing whatever it is you consider yourself to be doing. And for those here looking for employment or looking for employees, go ahead and mention that as well so that you can connect with those who are searching at ranks and whatnot along the way. So, I'll go ahead and start. My name's Ben Eggett. I've been running this meetup here for coming up on 5 years. 5 years next month. So that's pretty cool. I've been doing web development since a long time. Ruby, I don't know, 10 years plus. Done lots of different projects, lots of different things, and just like building stuff, really. I'm looking for good summer ideas, hence why I'm plugging with you guys. Because I need a vacation. So figure that out. And yeah, that's it. Let's go ahead and go around this way, and when people are done, you can kindly applaud them off to make them feel welcome.
I'm Allie. I've been for 3 years.
kid, and he's in the professional community. And my last startup came, so to look for a job.
My name is Mike. I have been kind of developing for now about 2 years. I've been on it. I've been trying to do my Ruby skills actively. I have worked for jobs since that time. Don't really know some of that. Maybe it's a bit.
My name's Calvin. I've been for just under a year. Went to transport in Denver, and also summer plans are going to go back out to Denver to see options. Jake Oldham. Been running for a few years now. Work at Nicola with Isaac, and I'm probably going to be floating close to this summer.
Depending on how this talk goes, really.
Depending on if Isaac lets me become a contributing effort to see you. Prove your work. Yeah.
My name's Michael. I've been programming for 3 years. I work with Ben at Hardband. I do mostly Ruby on Rails and front end stuff. Summer plans, Europe, dates a couple times, music festivals, whatever else needs to be money on.
My name is Mohammed. I am moving from a network, more software. I'm weekly data there. Rates and looking forward to know more what the changes happened in the last 20 plus years. That's not my new program. See.
Hello, my name is Dipesh. I'm from Portugal. I've been doing Ruby for 3 weeks, so I'm pretty good. So I'm about to Sloan and really interested in Ruby programming and trying to.
I'm Doug, new programming. Definitely in the 4th week at that point. Summer plans, hopefully, well, assuming I don't have a job when I'm done, I'm going to try to sneak off to a Broncos 49ers pregame because I'll still be 2 quarter real game. And do a motorcycle trip over to San Francisco, up the coast to Washington, and back. So there's an idea for you.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Zoe. I just moved from New Mexico to also attend Dev Point, and I've been coding for, I guess, a month or 2 now. And my cool summer plan is to learn how to rock climb, and also I'm looking for a job as well. And that's it.
We switched to data engineering this summer.
Hello, I'm Brent. Isaac and Jake. Summer plans
My name is Parker. And
actually more than that. Things are yet. And so plans
Where are you going?
So
St. Louis is the best place to see
That's
it.
where I'm going, actually, Yellowstone. Nice.
Yeah. St. Louis is like a minute longer of like dark time.
It's like the solar eclipse.
And yeah, I'm not going there. I'm just saying technically that's the best place to see it.
Nice. Cool. Cool. You can introduce yourself
Cool.
in a minute. So I learned something. I'm definitely going to do more about the second day. Cool. Okay. So that said, I can't think of any other announcements or things we need to cover. For those who aren't familiar with Utah Ruby User Group, check out utruby.org. There are other meetups in Utah Valley and South Salt Lake County, Sandy area that also happen once monthly. And we're trying to do some more just lunch type things throughout the summer and going into next year a little bit as well. So if any of you are up north, there is also a Logan Ruby lunch that happens monthly going on too. So check those out. And that said, I'll go ahead and turn time over to Isaac. And then if there's time after, we may have some time for some lightning talks after that. So thanks, guys.
Cool. So hopefully everyone out in like the cyberlands can hear me. My name is Isaac Sloan. I've been programming for 13 years, doing Ruby for about 10 and a half, and Crystal for about a year and a half. And today we're talking about Crystal because it's related in some ways to Ruby, and it's crazy fast, and it's made programming really fun for me again. So yeah, let's start off. Some of you were here for like Crystal Part 1, and you know how to install Crystal and some of the things about Crystal, but let's go over that really fast. Sharing my screen now. Cool. Okay, so crystallang.org is the official website for the Crystal language. If you come here, you can learn how to install it. You can come down here, it will show you some basic stuff, like here's a basic HTTP server, which could pretty much be as complicated or simple as you wanted it. I mean, you could just print text, you could throw case statements in there, you could throw handlers into the new, which would just be middleware that would go through, and you know, resolve sessions, resolve Flash, resolve CSRF, whatever it needs to be. It kind of makes what Rails is doing seem like a lot simpler in a way, like in your head. Kind of removes some of the magic we've always been told was there. So it is a typed system, unlike Ruby. So it is important to like know what the type of a variable is when you define a function. The function is actually, or a method, it's compiled so that you can only pass the types that you tell it you can pass in. By default, it will infer that by what you are sending to it. Let me just give you an example of that really fast. So you can go to play.crystallang.org, which actually will just compile and run code for you. There's a couple other servers I know people have up too. It's also kind of used as gist in the Crystal world too, because you can actually like edit and run it again and stuff like that. So it's pretty handy. Just as an example, let's just use like sum. So like def sum a b a plus. I don't know why I can't type. I usually can, except for when I'm presenting. 1 plus 3. And here's for that output. So in that case, it actually is compiling that as just expecting there's going to be int 32s passed to it. So I didn't actually have to tell it that. One thing that you'll notice that's interesting is if I were to copy that and pass in like my first and last name, it's going to still add it, but it's treating it, it's just basically calling plus on the string, which isn't probably what I want. So this is where actually typing it comes into play. Could just copy that, tell this one that it's a string. I could probably tell both of them they're a string, but put those in and say join with a space. Now when I call the second one, it actually is like, okay, well, it's a string, not an integer. So it overloads, and actually I'm calling the same method, but it's doing two different things. Yes, I can. Sorry about that. Okay. So and let me go back to editing that.
I thought it made Isaac sound very dignified as he's speaking.
Like a beat poem.
Yeah.
I mean, another thing I could do is I could copy this same thing and add C to it, perhaps. And now if I call it 3 times, it's going to do the same thing. You could still like override it as like a splat with args, or you could say like, you know, take an entire array or something. But this was just really simple, like kind of what the type system is like a little bit. Let's actually go and look at Amber now, and we can talk more about syntax later. If anybody wants to install Crystal, probably the easiest way would just be go to install, click on, make it bigger, click on macOS, Homebrew, and just brew update, brew install Crystal line. Probably just brew install Crystal line, really. And yeah, then you'll have Crystal on your computer, and you can compile anything you want with it. So second thing, this is the Amber homepage. It doesn't really do anything but give you a few links right now. So mostly ignored unless you need to Google something. It has kind of quite a few contributory things on it that some people have commented about on Reddit. But you know, so anyway, go to the GitHub. Here we have Amber Crystal Amber. Under this project, we actually have helpers, which are a pretty good start for all form helpers, you know, what we're kind of familiar with like form 4 and like the ability to like then go through and add all the form, all the stuff, all the fields inside of a form and have some kind of validations on them. That's especially useful for like, you know, CSRF and checkboxes and like, you know, the hidden get method for puts and patch and all of that. So that's coming along nicely. That hasn't actually been added into the command line yet. Down here we have the Amber CMD, which is basically the equivalent of like the Rails command line, which is like, you know, Rails new, Rails generate, whatever. Let's click on that project really fast. If you come over here, the README is actually pretty good. There's other documentation that sits around at random places like Gitbook and stuff that isn't fully up to date right now. This is up to date. So pretty much the basic ideas. I mean, you have like Amber help if you need that. In order to install this, let's actually talk about that first. So make it a bit bigger. Basically, just git clone this project and cd into it and install shards. Shards are like gems. That's like bundle install. It actually kind of makes more sense though, because like a shard is a subset of a crystal, whereas a gem is actually a superset of a ruby. So anyway,
learned from Ruby and Rails mistakes is what.
Yes. And then just run make, and that will actually just build a binary and link it. So yeah, I've actually already done that, but I'll just go pretend to do it again. As soon as this is bigger. Can you guys see it? Oh no. Yeah, I'll try to. Okay. Go. Really? Okay. Yeah, I don't even know what my like theme would look like that way. Let's try to make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so basically, just what I said as far as installing Amber. It's a couple lines, pretty easy. So I just run Amber new and call it urug blog, and yes, and as you see, it really quickly created a whole bunch of files. CD into urug blog, and by default, let me make that bigger too. By default, we have controllers. Instead of putting it under app, we put it under source. But under there, we have like a controller. Basically, nothing's there. We have home controller, inherits from Amber controller base, has an index method, and renders index slang. If we go and look at that, there's pretty much nothing there, but it should look pretty familiar to you. If you look at the application, it's Sloan. Yeah, I've done everything I can to help this project get on parity with actual Sloan. It's pretty much there. I mean, obviously it can't like interpret eval Ruby inside of itself, but other than that, I mean, it's pretty much there. Or CoffeeScript, but it does do CSS and JavaScript if we needed to. So yeah, let's go back to here and Amber generate scaffold. We'll just call it post title string content text tags string, and it quickly generated all of those files. Is this actually broadcasting through? Okay, cool. So you see it just generated migrations, controllers, some helpers, the spec helper. We actually need, the one thing that doesn't fully work in here right now is a spec. We should have that fixed in a couple of days, but the generated specs probably won't pass by default. So they will like by Friday. So here we have a partial, now slang, here's a form. Should look pretty familiar. Let's look at that again. And okay, actually, let's not open a new one of those. We have ECR and slang. ECR is pretty much exactly AirB, yeah. And there's actually is an option when you generate a project to say, here, let me just go back and look at this really fast. So if you come down here, you'll see we have templating engine T. You can choose slang or ECR. And then like these dependencies right here, by default, if you say like Rails new, by default, it actually like tries running your entire bundle install, which in some cases is really annoying because you probably want to go add 5 more things and then run it. And sometimes run a slow internet connection and you end up, your installation takes like 10 minutes before you can do anything. So there's actually a flag that says run it by default. Otherwise, it doesn't run it by default. So yeah, so I mean, we have like, generate, we have new, we have migrate. Watch actually what that's doing, because it's a compiled language, is it's watching for changes on files and then quickly recompiling, which allows you pretty much, yeah. It's using a Crystal project called Sentry currently to do that, but yeah, it's pretty much Guard in a lot of ways. There's also one that is more Guard that's called Guardian, but this one is currently using Sentry. So let me go back to terminal. So let's just run shards. So you have a shard, which you could just hit, or you could type install, which is the same thing as running it by default, same as, or you could say update, which is necessary in some cases. And that actually just goes out to GitHub. You could also go out to like a local path to get your code. And then it just adds them all. So yeah, so pretty much I'm currently using Postgres. Postgres is the default database adapter. You can choose SQLite or MySQL. Because I chose Postgres, I'm just gonna run it in Docker because my main projects are using MariaDB. So So anyway, to run this, I'm just going to run docker compose up, and this is going to, create a network and break. Hold on. Wonder if somebody like went and deleted all my. Default. I literally did this like 3 minutes ago, or right before I came here, so that's interesting. Here, I have an idea. B, MySQL, and there's okay. No, stop asking me that, IBM. Cool, now I told it to install dependencies by default. It's using MySQL. We actually have migrations, but we don't have like a RakeDB create at this point. So I'm just going to go over to SQL Pro really fast and called it urug blog. So add database, urug blog development, and add, and cd urug blog, and now I should be able to run Amber migrate up. Do migrations, message file folder. Oh, yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, okay, Amber, sorry. I got flustered by the first thing breaking. Amber, generate scaffold. Post, title, string, content, text, go. Okay, now let's run migrations. Cool, they work. And now I'll just run Amber watch.
Are you actually generating SQL files there? Is that what I talking about? Migration folder.
Pretty much, yeah.
Code in there, or is it like raw SQL?
It's pretty much raw SQL with some comments that say basically what you have to do to drop and what you have to do to create. Cool, so as you see, it's actually running now. It compiled, it's running on port 3000, server started in development, etc. So I'm gonna go to localhost 3000, on post, click on new. And way too big. And and with this, with like basically simple hello world actually still rendering through Slang, on a 4-core server, I was able to get like 100, I think 170, 160 1,000 requests per second. On like an 8-core AWS server, I was able to get about 200, 260 something. I've been meaning to try like a 32-core just for the hell of it, but like it's really fast. So let's actually go and look at the code some more. Oh yeah, like the same. But it's not really a fair benchmark because like let me actually show you a couple of things in here really fast, and then I'll tell you why it's not a fair benchmark. Other than being compiled, that's kind of an obvious part. So we have like this pipeline concept right here, which lets us easily define like pretty much our entire middleware stack. So Rails obviously probably minimum has like 20 things in its middleware stack running to begin with. And a lot of them like literally spin up like 15 other classes like just to like do basically 3 lines of code just to make it more object oriented, such as like, the cookie store and like a whole bunch of things. So even if it wasn't compiled, it's not really a straight across comparison. With that being said, if you spin up a brand new Rails app and you render hello world, but don't even render it. Actually just like output that as the last string, and you know, it will render. So like don't render a partial, or don't render anything, just render the text, like, you know, render text hello world. If you were to benchmark that with like the same benchmark on the same computer, you'd be able to get, like on my MacBook Pro with a single core, I can get about 70,000. On here, I'm getting about 500 with that Rails app. Like literally 500 versus like 70,000. But I mean, that isn't.
Even a Sinatra would probably be like 3,000 or something like that.
Well, I tried Hanami and only got to about 850. And I mean, I know Sinatra is smaller, lighter weight than that, right? But I mean, Hanami claims to be fast and stuff. So yeah, that's interesting. But anyway, so like this concept right here was kind of borrowed a little bit from Phoenix, where we have the idea of like, here's a pipeline. This one is for web. We need to render. We want a logger, which we could write our own logger or use the default one. We want to have Flash, and we want to have session, and probably CSRF. For static, basically, we just want to compress it and serve everything in the public folder. You could write like an API one and say like, in API, we like honestly probably don't need any of these things, but we probably need cores. That way, when it goes through all those routes, it's not actually having to even do any checks or any sort of logic to say like, oh, hey, just call the next one and don't do anything. You know, it's not even there. So that gives it like a little bit of speed. So, but I mean, just the fact that it's compiled is automatically giving you a lot of speed. Other parts of the framework that may be interesting, probably not the public folder. So like right here, so far we don't have much of a concept of like different environments, like completely different environment files, although obviously that would be really easy to extend even within just like a project like this, not even actually the framework. As it currently is, we're basically just saying like, if this environment exists, if it's production, then use develop, then these are the settings. If it's development, this is the settings, else just use this port. And and that could obviously be extended to, include more files or have a lot of different settings. And that actually is just kind of basically being generated in the main file right here and just saying set Amber environment from if the arg exists, if the environment variable exists, otherwise go to develop. So let's see, so forms probably look pretty familiar. They look familiar if you're used to Sloan or Hamel. Let's look at the controllers. So here's a controller. Post controller inherits from Amber controller base. We have another project where we're working on presenters for people that kind of like the concept of presenters, which, I think personally, I like them in some scenarios and I don't like them in other scenarios. So like, I think it's great to have the option, but I don't think forcing people to use them like Hanami does is useful, because it's, 4 times as much code and at least 3 times the files generally to like get the same thing done, which unless you're actually abstracting logic out of your controllers and saving yourself a lot of time there and not having to write a whole bunch of helpers or model methods, is not really saving you time. So that is going to be something that we do include, which will be super useful for a lot of things and like allow you to abstract your views even more from like your controllers. But in this case, we're just using the standard render concept, and this render method could probably be documented a little bit better right now. But basically, it's assuming application controller, application layout, unless you tell it otherwise. You could tell it otherwise like here, just afterwards as a second parameter, or you also have the ability in your controller to just go and set it. By default, all of your libraries are actually getting stored. Should be here. Oh, there we go. By default, all of your libraries are actually getting just installed within here so that it can compile. In the case that like in your shard file right here, oh yeah, we should look at shard files. So basically, this is your equivalent to a jump file, basically. It's YAML. And it pretty much, under dependencies, you can say, okay, so we need Amber. This is a GitHub. You also could say like path. And then you could say like / Amber or whatever, like if you have it checked out and you're working on it. In that case, when you would run that, it would actually create a symlink over here for like the Amber project, just symlink to wherever it is. In the case that you use path. So that's actually super.
Dependency manager for Crystal. I mean, the shard stuff, is there like a region equivalent that it can source from? Or?
Currently there isn't. I mean, and I don't really know if there's any real like motivation to do so, just because we can already source from like any Git lab or GitHub or any other Git project or local. So like what really is gained? I mean, even at this point, I mean, like, what are we really gaining from Ruby gems other than like getting guilted into contributing every year when we go to RailsConf?
Well, I mean, considering how many times GitHub's gone down this week, I don't know.
Ruby gems has gone down in like the history of like Ruby development as much as GitHub. But yeah, GitHub going down last night. GitHub going down last night was really annoying though.
Like 3 times.
Oh, okay. I just noticed the one last night, but so anyway, and it's not really tied to GitHub. Like it could be tied to any Git. It wouldn't be hard to make it be tied to SVN or something either. I mean, like all the source code for everything Crystal is written in Crystal, even the compiler, which makes it pretty easy to go and like edit even the standard library. You probably won't get a lot of that like actually like merged in, but if you want to use it, you can do that. What else was I saying? So yeah, this also basically is similar to your gem spec. In this case, it's like a project. So like, you know, gem spec is less necessary, but in the case that this was actually like a path, like I mean, if I ever were to go and click on Amber right here and go down and look at its shard, and like this is its requirements. And it actually having a version and like a name and all of that and authors and Crystal versions and licenses is pretty much exactly a gem spec, but it makes it more clear in the case of a library, like actually where your dependencies should be. And like, you know, in the case of developing a gem, you've probably noticed it's like, well, you need to put some things in your bundle still, and then you need to put some things in your like, you know, gem spec dependencies and say, oh, this is just a development dependency, but like to install them, you still pretty much need to run bundler. And so this makes that actually quite a bit cleaner. Pretty much for versions, in order to go and fetch that version, it's assuming a Git tag exists for that version. So it is important to make sure that that is done right.
And are you doing things with CLI stuff to help like push tags to Git?
I do have a project. I do have a project called C release or CRE release. Anyway, it maybe needs a better name, but basically it creates a tag, takes an optional comment, and changes the value at 2 places, like your version file inside of source and your version here. Comments basically bumping version and then pushes the tag up to GitHub. As far as Amber, we do have some stuff to do that. We've been working experimentally, like Eli and I, Eli here and me here, have been working experimentally on pushing via Docker directly to GitHub using, DigitalOcean, pushing directly to DigitalOcean using Docker Engine, and a couple other ones. I got a proof of concept of that working and then realized the way we were doing it didn't make sense because Docker Engine doesn't predictably work with Docker Compose. So I rewrote that over like last night and today. I now have another proof of concept, but anyway, like that concept is basically create a tag, push it up with a comment to master, create the machine on DigitalOcean using Docker Machine through the API, and then check out that tag from GitHub to that machine, and then start the Docker containers. Which, I mean, that process takes about 5 minutes. So most likely we need that's basically provisioning, and we probably need some other part that is like actually the deploying process as well. Unless too many people in the Docker world want to spin up a server, like every single time they deploy something. But to me, that seems like such a step backwards, like because it's 4 times as slow as everything else we did in the past. But I don't know. I guess it works for a lot of people. And so we do. I don't think we've fully agreed on this yet, like whether or not like it's necessary to actually have like stuff built into like the Amber command line to make it really easy to version like a web project. But because I don't think people necessarily do that a lot, but maybe they should. So that's kind of a thing that we've been discussing. I mean, there isn't really a good reason not to like say tag a project if you're going to release it to like a server, but I don't think it's really commonplace. Yeah. So, but we are working on some tools that will do that, and we have a couple more contributors we actually need to add to this list now. But and yes, if anybody wants like a fun open source project to work in, definitely like hit us up on like the Gitter channel. Speaking of which, if you guys don't like use Gitter, Gitter is awesome. Like. And it was recently bought by GitLab, I guess, but it's pretty much always been used in association with GitHub. Basically what it is pretty much a chat channel for pretty much like every open source project on GitHub and many other places. And it's super useful for just like, you know, like pretty much any project. I mean, the Rails one these days is basically just like, what editor should I use? But like, a lot of them are super useful. And I mean, any of the individuals in them, you could also just like private message them. And it also does a better job of like code highlighting too, because in order to like put code highlighting, I actually shared this in there too. But so like in order to do code highlighting, you can just use like basically GitHub like markup or markdown. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So if you're into open source at all, definitely check out Gitter. It's pretty much Slack, but like way easier to set up and keep track of. And just like Slack, it uses most of your battery. So I could go on forever, but like what questions do people have?
You showed us kind of the controllers and the views, show us kind of the models.
Okay. So current.
Also, sorry, in your controllers, I noticed something like you had just local variables defined. Like, do we not need the concept of instance variables with Crystal? Since
okay, so it's not really Crystal that doesn't, but it's the way we're doing rendering that, and also the fact that like pretty much there's a couple variables basically that you define. Is there any real reason not to make them available in your views? If there is, we haven't done that yet. Crystal has the same concept of instance variables as Ruby has. I haven't looked a lot into like how Rails is doing its renderers, and I maybe won't. But like, I mean, I know how they work. I don't know how they work behind the scenes necessarily. And yeah, like they do say like pretty much any instance variable is required. It is there, or a helper method is there, or so I'm not sure how they're filtering that, but we haven't done that, and I'm not sure if we're going to. I think in the case of with our observers, we're probably going to use the same renderers. And in the case of an observer, you do want every variable and function that exists to actually be directly available. So most likely, just to keep this compatible with both, we will just leave it like that. I'll bring up that controller again. So like you were mentioning, like we have a post right here. And if we were to go and actually look at show, let me actually watch. No, not two of them. Okay. I meant the other up command. Cool. So make that big again. Okay, come back here. I kind of messed up my scope by going up a directory and then fuzzy finding wasn't working. But so here's models. Sorry, you wanted to see views though. But you already kind of saw that. But basically, so if post ID, so yeah, we're not requiring them to be instance variables, and because like basically the controller is getting initialized in a Lambda to call the function. That actually turned out to be the fastest way to do it with the way like garbage collection and stuff is handled. It like basically initialize, so everything's containerized, so it can delete the entire thing immediately. afterwards. There was a very little difference actually, but it was actually a tiny bit faster that way rather than just having a lambda to call the action. Some of that is necessary because of the fact you can't define code at runtime like you can in Ruby. And anyway, like basically the only things it has access to here are basically what you defined in your action. So plus I mean, it's like it's still being rendered here in code. This is just a string builder really with Elixir. So, I mean, honestly, what's happening here is, let me go back to the controller. What's the model? Here's the controller. What's actually happening in this render method is it's looking at this file before compile time, at compile time, and it's turning it into basically a string builder, or literally it's turning it into a string builder. So then you have this string basically with a whole bunch of interpolated parts in it. And so this string actually at this point exists right here when it's compiled. So like when we call def index, it's literally saying, here's posts, here's a string that is being interpolated, return the output. Because this, it looks like a function, but it's actually a macro. And what a macro does is creates code at runtime. It just, unlike C and C++, where like your runtime like calls actually look nothing like your language, in Crystal they've done a pretty good job of making the libraries for macro and the library for the actual Crystal language look really similar. If we were to go back up here and look at Amber, we could look at the helpers. Well, here's controller, then we have like render. So like right here, this is a macro. And it's pretty much, there's a file name, the layout, by default it's true. And this is like, inside of it you have some kind of weird syntax right here, which is basically, you know, eval this at runtime. So it is, yes. Yeah, so then, it comes here. We actually have this set layout right here too. You could call on any controller to change the layout from the default option. And that basically just sets the layout constant in that scope for the controller you're in, rather than letting it be inherited. And that works same as you'd expect in Ruby as well. But I mean, it has to be done at compile time rather than at runtime. So that's really the only difference there. So let's go back to the controller. And I mean, so again, that's why, like, for instance, post in the case of index is available inside of index.slang. So, and if you wanted this to be ECR, it would literally be as easy as that. And then obviously having an ECR file there. Otherwise, it will not compile. That's one cool thing actually about Amber and Crystal is if you have like any sort of method where like it could ever be nil and you're calling a method on it, it won't compile. Which could save you a lot of time. And in some cases, save you a lot of code and actually having to check like, is this no before I call it? Let's go look at the models now. So kind of intentionally, we've remained somewhat ORM like agnostic because there's quite a few different ideas out there. And even in Rails, I mean, it comes bundled with Active Record, but I mean, a lot of people mistakenly use MongoDB or something else entirely. Even within like standard like relational databases, we have this concept of like, is the repo pattern, the ORM pattern better? Like maybe one's better for one thing and one's better for another thing. Currently, we've incorporated one called Granite ORM. They used to be part of the Chemalist project. We're probably potentially also going to incorporate one called Crecto, which is like basically a Crystal rewrite of like Ecto from Elixir, which some people like and some people don't. So currently generators are using Granite ORM. So if you look at this, we have like, Granite ORM, adapters, MySQL. I guess in a lot of ways, we don't necessarily have to include that here if we had included it previously, same as Ruby. But it's easy just to generate it with like required in your model. And then we just inherit that from Granite ORM. because of the fact that we have to do things at compile time, we are telling it basically there's a field called title, which will be a string here. There's a field called content, which is also a string, although in the database, the migration is telling it it's text, but the model is going to treat it as a string. And then we're telling it automatically just build timestamps for us. There are ways that you could get around that, such as have a macro that actually goes and looks at the database while you're running this, and then outputs this code for you, basically. I started working on that a little bit. It seems most people are of the opinion that like that's one of the parts of like Active Record they almost didn't like, because of the fact that they look at their model and they want to know like, hey, what are all my columns? Which is why basically everybody uses the annotate gem and throws stuff above it. So I don't know. I think there's kind of pros and cons to having this kind of explicitly defined. And, you know, obviously we're open to suggestions and pull requests on that. And I have a couple like proof of concept projects I've been working on there.
This syntax reminds me of when I mistakenly used MongoDB. Something like this in there. Right, you have to define everything.
It is a little reminiscent of that, yeah. But I mean, I think it's still pretty clean. And I mean, because of the fact that, I mean, like I said, we're pretty much all running annotate anyway, which throws that there. And then like, you know, a month later, there's 3 more columns and nobody ran it again. And you're like, oh, whatever. And then somebody does a pull request with like every file changed because they just ran annotate again. So I don't know. Like I said, I think there's pros and cons to like this. And like, I mean, I think it's sort of this way just because of the fact that Crystal is compiled, but it's still not really limited to that. There are ways you could get around that. And it seems like from the people I've talked to, most of them haven't thought a real desire to do that. And like, I could create it and merge it, but people would probably like argue with me.
Okay.
So, as far as, we have some branches and like has minis and things like that. Currently, like on projects I've been working on, I've pretty much just basically been doing like has minis with like, you know, like def has or def like comments, and then like comment dot find, you know, like basically find, you know, then we don't actually have full ARL syntax, but I mean like we could say like, you know, where like post ID like equals self.id, yeah. So I mean, and as such, I mean, it's, you know, it's not that bad, but I mean, there are actually open branches where we have been working on actually basically creating this from the start. As such, I mean, in a lot of cases, it's still not that bad to have it that way, but I mean, it definitely could be easier. And like I said, like we are working on form helpers. If you come back over here and actually click on, you know, these, and I think there's another pull request as well in here that I haven't looked at. And tags, forms. So yes, I mean, we do have them. You could like pretty much include it in your application controller or whatever, and then like you could build forms in a similar way that makes sense. They're not by any means all the way done, but we've made a ton of progress on them really fast. Actually, pretty much, mostly John. You may know him from URUG a little bit, but he's written most of this. So, and yeah. So, any other questions? I will see if that actually works. Okay, so that I haven't looked a lot on. We do have and Amber Console technically is using ICR. I haven't looked at how that works. I don't think I've actually ever tried using that. So that probably does need fixed. But we do have what's called ICR, but really all that's doing is basically taking your code, keeping track of like scope, and like basically sending the code to be compiled. So I mean, you know, I could say like, you know, put hello and it actually takes longer than like Ruby would because it's actually having to compile it. Probably like the best thing as far as what we have as far as like a somewhat interactive console would be Crystal Play, which is a little bit different from what I showed you earlier. Localhost 8080, but I'll bring this up. And this was something I was trying to work on with encryption. So then you could like, you know, could write like def hello name but hello name, and like as you're running that, you actually see, you should technically actually see, oh, I guess I probably need to call it. So hello urug. Well, so because that's getting called, you now see like, okay, so this is what's happening here. There's basically this string right here. It's of type string, and then this is returning nil. So this is kind of showing you all of your return values in like real time. In some cases, that gets a little weird because like, say I call this again, I say like my name. Now like up here, it's just like 2x, there is a string. You know, so like pretty much, I mean, any of this like could exist. And in a lot of cases, like kind of does exist. So in some cases, it's actually really solid. As far as like Amber and even really Chemalist, I mean, what works fine. And there would be like literally no problem with using it in, you know, for an application. Obviously, like all the tools that exist aren't available from like the Ruby world, but to be perfectly honest, most of the gems that exist, you probably shouldn't be using anyway. So, I don't know. There's that.
I had a question.
Okay.
So, do you have like what type of debugger shards, and how does that work with you?
So basically, I mean, you try compiling, and you try reading the error message, and I mean, so there's very few runtime errors you could get, but like some of them would be like this array you tried calling doesn't exist. That's actually something I should have talked about from Crystal. So like say I include an array, we'll just say AR equals, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, whatever. So now we have this array. Now let's say I try outputting AR, let's just put like, yeah, 3. So that's not going to exist. That's actually going to cause an exception, or index out of bounds exception, versus just returning nil. If you do want it to return nil, you can put a question mark and it'll return nil. So that is a small difference from Ruby with how it handles arrays. Also because if I were to try to define an array that didn't exist, and this is kind of back to the typing system again, if I were to do that, it's going to error. For empty arrays, you have to tell it what needs to be in the array. Otherwise, it can't initialize it. Because I put stuff in my other one, it knew I'm putting ints in it. And it probably actually, if you look at that, over here, it's actually going to tell you AR's array. Okay, this is annoying. Okay, I can click on it, cool. So it tells you it's an array with a union of int 32 and string. So had I not put things in it, it has no way of knowing what memory to initialize. So then you would have to say like of string in this. Now that only will actually accept the string. Or I could say of string and I don't know, and string and float 32. So now it's going to accept both of those things. Another thing that I could have done is I could say like hash, or sorry, because I mean I could have said that, but array, and I could have said string int 32 and dot new. Oh, what were you gonna say, Ben?
I was just going to say, so with Crystal, you really need to know how to just see data types.
Pretty much. Some of them like are a little bit easier to work with. Like you don't have to be like, long double or something, but like pretty much yes. Speaking of C, well, I mean, you saw that presentation before, basically about like C wrappers, and basically the point of that was basically how to like basically write native extensions for Ruby, which didn't really show a whole lot about actually how to wrap C. One thing that is actually really cool is it is actually pretty easy to wrap C. So if I were to, let's go back to my Crystal workspace. This is my gist that I get going a bit ago, so that's what's up with the hash. But so like if we were to look at this right here, let me make this bigger. So right here I have like this C file right here, which is like, here's a struct. And like I've seen quite a few things on like how to like actually like wrap a C library that exists, but I've never been like, how would you combine a C file into like a Crystal file? So I kind of like spent a bit of time and tried to figure that out. So here's basically like a fairly simple like hello world app. There's these two methods right here that basically take this concept of a person, which I've defined here as a struct, and print to the screen, hello, hello for like the first one right here, name, age, height. Are you really this old and only this tall? And then I wrote the same one as not a pointer. And then I came into my Crystal file right here. And this is how the linking works. So I'm basically just saying link to this object file. So basically I'm using GCC to compile it into an object file, which still has a linking. And then this right here is just libmath. It doesn't need to be there except for that down here. I just demoed that really fast. Here I'm wrapping libsay, which is just a constant I invented right there. You could name it literally anything, but you need something to contain your C libraries in. So now I'm defining the same struct here so that I could pass it as an object back and forth. I'm coming down here and I'm saying, here's my C function, hello pointer. This is a variable from my type that it takes, which is a pointer of libsay person and void. And then the same here, but without a pointer. Then I'm coming down here and I'm calling libsay person, defining a new one of it, have p. And then I come down here and I'm actually calling libsay hello pointer. And because that one accepts a pointer, I'm telling it, give me the pointer of this object right here that I can then pass to the C function. Here I'm just straight up passing the object. So that's actually pretty useful in the case that you have like a lot of C code that you need to use and you don't want to like rewrite it in anything because that would take time. And there is an experimental project that I think is actually kind of part of the Crystal core right now that will do its best to look at a .h file and write all this code for you. So yeah, and then pretty much as far as deploying, really all that's necessary would be have Crystal installed on like a server and copy your code there and compile it. So quite a few less dependencies really than like a Rails app. I mean, you could proxy it through Nginx, but in a lot of cases, there's really no use. I've had like Crystal apps running on production for like 6 months with like no downtime. I mean, obviously, in some cases, there would be a good reason to load balance it. There'd be a good reason to, you know, run it through Nginx or Varnish or something like that. But yeah. And somebody did write a Capistrano wrapper as well that like basically you could deploy a Crystal application with Capistrano, but then you have to have like still the Ruby dependency on like whatever you're deploying from. Which I mean is fine, but like some cases just mixing things, you know, having a whole mix of a million things is kind of annoying. Like, you know, like RVM being written in like shell script.
We actually used it on our codestations.tech website. It worked out fine.
Yeah. So, yeah. Any other questions? So your question was, do I mind having the types, or do I find that the types make it so I don't have to write as many tests? Basically, well, to be perfectly honest, like when you look at most like Rubyist tests, they're only testing the things that probably won't break. Like they're not usually testing like, oh, what happens if I call this thing and it turns out being nil, because in their opinion it would never be nil or something, right? And that's like most of the errors you're going to get in Ruby. So like, yes, I'm not testing those things, but to be fair, a lot of people probably haven't tested those things in their Ruby code either. So I find that I'm writing probably a similar amount of tests, because the things that are obvious to me that I should test in Ruby are also obvious to me that I should test in Crystal. That being said, like one thing that I think was really cool about Crystal is its default testing language, to me, is very pleasant to work with. I know some people that come from the RSpec world wish that it used more of like expect syntax, whereas it's using kind of a more of like should have, shouldn't, basically should or should not sort of like syntax, which all the people in RSpec loved, you know, like back in 2012, but then they decided that was really terrible convention and everybody uses expect now. But anyway, let me just demo that really fast, just because that isn't a thing. Let's just go into Amber. Okay, so like if we look at the core here, that big enough, kind of. So we come in here and just look at our specs. So I mean, basically have the idea of like, you know, describe this, describe this. It renders HTML from a slang template. Here you go. Test controller, pass in context, render template page should equal HTML output, which is defined right here. It also has the same thing like Ruby has, where like you could define like strings at any point with like basically this, dash this. Although Ruby recently added the ability to actually keep your indenting sane. Like by default, this code in Ruby will actually have all of these indents here before the code. But they recently added a feature where you could add a tilde here. And this is in Ruby. Sorry, this right here is Crystal, but I'm demoing a Ruby thing for some reason in the syntax. In Ruby right now, this with the tilde is actually equivalent in Crystal to just straight up this. And I don't think Crystal actually went with the option where if you're indented, it actually includes these indents, because I think they pretty much said like, why the hell would you want that? Because otherwise, I mean, the only way in Ruby to deal with that was basically take this code and tab it back now, because we didn't want all that. And so anyway, so that's a useful thing that exists just in Crystal in general. But its specs, in my opinion, actually look pretty nice. And they also run really fast, I say.
Minus compilation.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, literally, I usually have them all run by now. I'm a little confused as to why I just said they run fast and then they didn't run fast. But anyway, here, let me see if they like cache something and that was fast. Okay, that was a lot faster. I don't know. Anyway, so like definitely there was some compile time, but like it shouldn't. It usually is like a second, not like 5 seconds. So anyway, like, you know, and then that goes through and prints out all the green stuff. And if there's any puts inside your text or whatever, and then it puts that too. And probably we should get rid of these, but they exist. So, and that's technically just because of the logger. Because certain things are getting called that are calling the logger, and then the logger's outputting because there's not disabled in the test. So, yeah, anyway, that's pretty much Amber, and then Crystal kind of as a larger picture. And I mean, pretty much the game plan for Amber basically is, you know, continue improving the pieces that are there. I think the core is actually pretty solid. We have some pretty good progress right now on mailers. As you know, like last year, Sidekick has a branch that was rewritten in Crystal. We worked on using that. We also kind of have a concept that maybe like we don't even need anything that crazy, because it's pretty easy just to spin up another process that like basically is going to, you know, look in a Redis queue, which is pretty much the basis of like, you know, background task. So there's a couple ideas there. I mean, Drew from Chemalist, which was another framework that's been around for about a year and a half, just came over and joined us, and he's done quite a bit of work on mailers and background jobs. So that's really useful. We have WebSockets, and we have a branch where we're working on channels at this point, rather than just straight up connections. So you can actually, actually have channels. So that would be great, and we'll probably throw a Redis background on that. Currently, I think we're just actually storing that in memory currently as it's running. Basically, what the current sockets are and stuff like that. But I mean, there is a branch that does a lot more than that. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. We've made a lot of progress really, really fast, and like, I don't know. I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel 2 months.
Cool.
In a lot of ways, I feel like we pretty much have about most of what I remember Rails having in 2005 when I first started. And honestly, like, the way they did scaffolding back then was super weird. So like, in a lot of ways, it's like almost even easier to work with.
What's the vision is like direction? Rails really embraces the
I don't think we want to be super opinionated on that. I mean, like, and I mean, you can say Rails really embraces that, but I think in a lot of ways, like, Rails definitely in the beginning embraced that because that was the only thing that made sense. But I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of APIs, that are written, and now, like, I mean, Rails even has an API mode that disables most of the middleware that isn't necessary as well for APIs. So like, I think Rails less embraces that now. I mean, I think generally, personally, I feel there's still a huge use for views, and in a lot of cases, a lot of things that have been written recently in like Ember, Angular, React, version number, whatever, like, shouldn't have been, because I use a site I used to use 3 years ago, and now it doesn't work nearly as good as it used to 3 years ago because my back button takes me straight back to Google, or multiple other things that apparently these frameworks were supposed to take care of but don't seem to have. And I mean, I'm very opinionated on Ben is too about like front-end apps, I guess, but like, my concept with like front-end apps is like, if somebody were to come to me and say like, hey, we need like Google Drive or Google like Docs, I would be like, well, obviously we need JavaScript and a pretty impressive framework to do that, right? But if somebody comes to me and says, hey, we need the ability to like basically create, like, post forms and create it and edit it and like manage it, I'm gonna be like, why would you use a fancy framework for that? Like, it's gonna take you 6 times as much code to get it done, and it's still going to, at the end of the day, your goal is to make it look like a website's supposed to look. So I don't think we're gonna be super opinionated on that. I think the fact that we allow multiple pipelines, basically we can have an API pipeline that like literally is basically doing nothing but parsing params. Like, it's going to basically take the request, parse your params for you, hand it off to the controller, and you can do whatever you want with it. So, I mean, I don't think we're not going to be opinionated toward like, server-side rendering, but that will work very well. I mean, server-side rendering or JSON or any other rendering is going to work fine. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, you're still going to be server-side rendering your JSON. I mean, so yeah, that. Any other questions?
One of the quirks that you found, I guess it's more personal question, but what some of the quirks of Crystal that are either good compared to maybe,
I guess it depends on like how in depth like anyone is like in Ruby, right? So like, I mean, if you've used a lot of like the really underlying structures in Ruby, if you've like, if you've used like, like the module callbacks like included and all of this to actually like create code like when something's included, like, in this case, they have a macro that will actually do that. So I mean, that's going to be a little bit different. And the fact that it's statically typed is going to be different. And like, there's certain things that like there's certain things you may have taken for granted in Ruby. I mean, it seems like you've mostly been doing a lot of React and stuff anyway, so basically it's just going to look nicer in JavaScript. But okay. Yeah. I think most of what people are really familiar with in Ruby, like your average person that is like a Ruby developer, you're not going to notice a whole lot of difference because, like I said, even with the typing, a lot of that can be inferred. So, I mean, you are, depending on just like how in depth you're getting, if you're just trying to say like basically get this code and render it, you're not going to notice really anything. But if you're trying to like actually write a whole bunch of shards yourself and figure out how like everything works and where to inherit from and what to do when things inherit and like all of that, like, I mean, yeah, there are a few like underlying things that are going to be different because of it being compiled and statically typed. Method overloading is the thing you can't do in Ruby that you can do in pretty much every other language. And as such, like to me, I almost like really like that because like I really like Ruby, but I also have a background in C++ and Java. And as such, to me, it's kind of like best of both worlds. I mean, like in Ruby, I kind of missed the concept of like method overriding. And the fact that like I can do that again and still have syntax that like is pleasant to me is actually kind of, I really like that. So, yeah.
So do you guys have like a to-do list as far as like getting to whatever you're going to consider a minor stable release?
We talked about that a lot last night. We do have like quite a few like to-do lists, I would say, but they don't. So I guess yeah. So I mean, let me make this smaller. So I mean, we have like a lot of things to do and a lot of things done, and like it isn't necessarily. I don't think we've set in stone yet. Like when will be version 1 or something like that. But like each one of these projects within here, actually, we have a list of like a bunch of things to get done and things that we're working on. And we have talked at least twice about needing to sit down and kind of define like a roadmap for version 1. But as so, it's just like, oh, this needs done and all these things don't need done. Let's get them done. So
where's Amber at on the ability to use things like shared resources for DBs or whatever, like plugging into a cloud-hosted Redis or Postgres or whatever else? Is that support already there out the gate? You still need to do stuff on that?
So, okay, let me just go back to my file here.
I think that's one of the biggest like hurdles for a growing framework to be able to get like I could actually use this in production and run it on 2 machines instead of just a single one or whatever, right?
Yeah, and that isn't really an issue. I mean, so, okay, so this is a migration. You asked about that a second ago, so I'll just show it. So you see you have down and up, basically. That's the only thing. Otherwise, it's SQL. If you go back to config, never mind, not config, or database YAML. Okay, so basically, we're just basically using a URL form for our database YAML. This can also be overridden with database URL environment variable. So as far as SQL, SQLite, and Postgres, which this currently supports, that could connect to any central database. So that's not an issue. As far as Redis goes, there are a couple of Redis wrappers, or whatever they would be called, in the Crystal realm. We haven't built any generators or anything for that, but I mean, that being said, I mean, like, it's your application, you're including Amber as a library. It's like include another library, and same as you would in Rails, right? And create an object and map to it. Like, so, I mean, that isn't a problem. I mean, there's going to be some random way out, like, you know, NoSQL database out there that like probably doesn't have a wrapper for it in Crystal at this point. But I mean, Mongo does, obviously, and Redis does. And, yeah. And SQLite, Postgres, and MySQL, which, you know, obviously continues to work with like all of the better MySQL clones like Percona and like MariaDB. So yeah, you should be in no way be tied to a single server. I mean, in fact, currently there's an option when you start Amber. If you set like a process count environment variable, it will actually spin up that many processes for it. Which is theoretically the same as running on multiple boxes. I mean, it's not on multiple boxes, but.
Well, I mean, obviously that's one of the main benefits of using Crystal under runtimes. The hard thing about MRI anyway is you're locked to single processor per process, right? Single core per process, I should say. Where in C you're just not. You can.
Yeah. Well, and so yeah, so I mean, basically, I mean, theoretically, Ruby could still kind of do the implementation we're doing. We're pretty much saying like basically spawn a new process of the server, use it. Yeah. But I mean, it's just way faster. And at that point, it can utilize the thread. And in a lot of ways, it's actually probably faster than spinning a new thread because you're not having to copy cache. And the memory usage of Crystal is so low anyway that you're not really seeing this huge memory footprint. Like, you know, in Ruby, like Passenger actually tries to do a pretty good job of like kind of sharing threads within like itself so that you don't get this huge amount of memory. But in Crystal, that's less necessary because of the fact it's already using very little. And its concurrency, they pretty much copied Go on that. And there's a branch that does do full like, multi-threaded support, but that's probably not going to be released until later on this year, until they work a few bugs out and make sure that the entire standard library is completely thread safe. So I mean, currently, they do support SO shared port though. So currently, pretty much what most of the frameworks are doing are just spin up 5 instances or however many cores you have of instances, and then like just let the operating system decide which one gets hit on the same port. And I mean, you could do the same thing with Nginx or just proxy a whole bunch of ports, but you don't even need to with like Linux SO shared ports. And yeah, that's it.
Cool. Any other questions? Awesome.
Cool. Thanks.
Cool.
I can stretch my legs.
Yeah, thanks, Isaac. That's pretty cool. It's kind of fun to be involved in the early days of a framework like this, you know. I mean, the big difference obviously is like in writing something like Amber versus when you first wrote Rails is you learn from the shortcomings and the pitfalls and the problems of one, and you know, hopefully the guys are experienced enough that they've done it a little bit better, right? Like even in, and that's kind of the evolution of languages and frameworks, right? Like even like on the server automation side, for example, you know, we started out with Chef and Puppet, and then guys like Ansible and SolidStack came into play. And learning off of all the things that were better from that, and you know, took what was good, kept it, took what sucked,